this is in the Alps, and I go to a particular area. It's in the Bavarian Alps, not that far from Munich. And I've been to this part of the world now about 6 or 7 times, and it's incredibly powerful energetically for me. So I really feel drawn to go back over and over. And this is how I work when I'm there. So one thing that, as you are painters, that you're interested in is obviously the materials. I work on paper there, and with mixed media, as you can see, all sorts of watercolor pencils. I also have lots of inks, and you will see more as we move through, and we can also talk about it. And I work on the floor, so in this case on the ground. So that's another way for me to be very, very much in touch with land, really, with the connection that I want to establish. I used to work with easels even when I was outside, but quite a few years ago I changed, and it makes a big difference for me. And just to show you, this is the painting that I was actually doing there. And you can see a little bit, maybe get a first impression of the kind of approach I take, which is, in this instance, you can sort of make up some mountain area, but then you also get that kind of energy and singing of the sky. This was something that really attracted me in that view, was this enormity and this power of the sky. And I wanted to somehow get a grip on that. So I'm not that interested in representing things as if they were photographic, but rather an energetic sense or a felt sense. So it's very experiential in that way. And equally, I want to introduce you to this little element up here, because a lot of my work I don't understand, and I invite you already to look at the work with a very open mind. And with the question, what do I see? What do I experience here? There isn't a definition, there isn't the right answer. But for me, for instance, these two are two characters, as if they were little elves or something that just fly into the picture. And I'm not sure that is the case, but maybe you see it like that, or maybe you see it differently. This is just showing you how I then work when I'm out there. With my setup, and just really embedded in this whole space. So I'm not an onlooker. I think that's one of the important things, especially we have so much photography and distancing that comes with that. Now, this is one of the views that I have, and you can see sometimes it's pretty cold when I go. We still got snow. But I was fascinated, and I am fascinated by this range of sheer cliff. It's limestone, and I have a very strong connection with limestone. And I just sense this incredible force within that formation. And here is one picture in which I was addressing the way that I feel about that. So this represents the actual cliff that you've seen. And then here are these various sort of energies which feed maybe, or get transmitted. So it's a very rhythmical thing where things connect up. I have to say that I don't quite know how these paintings come about. So it's more like I'm taken by a particular sensation, and then somehow the work evolves in a way that's a complete surprise to me, and that's what I like. This is another take on the same mountain range, but very, very different weather. It was in the autumn, so it was another visit. And I was more fascinated by the kind of expansiveness of the lyrical kind of melody of how these different hills and mountains ripple. So it's got a very different feel than in the painting itself. And if I now move to another picture, which is in a similar area, this particular mountain holds a great value to me. It has from the start been the seat of the goddess. And I've done enormous amount of work around the seat of the goddess. And it gives me an opportunity to show you that sometimes the weather isn't all that friendly. And one of the aspects of tonight's talk is also how do you actually cope? How do I cope with the logistics of working outside. And one of the things you've probably already seen, I use a tarp on the ground, and that helps me protect myself and especially the paper from any wet that's underneath. But also you can have wet from above. And so I bring a second tarp that I can then string up and use whatever I find. In this case, there's a little tree here, or I find a stick and put it up or whatever. So then I can work despite the fact that it might be snowing or raining. And just to show you another one of those kinds of setups when it's been really quite watery, so I really did need to take it down all the way to have that kind of protection. And then I work here in this area looking out onto the other side. And here, for instance, is my roll where I can roll up the paper to bring it up and take it down, because that's another aspect of how to protect the work when I'm in transit. One of the pieces that arose in my many visits to the sort of, it's this whole ledge on the mountains, is this, and you can here see the seat of the goddess, and behind her the cliffs that we've seen before a little bit as well. And again, the way that this mountain ties into whatever's underneath. And I think one of the things for me is that the earth and the rock has such a strong, if you like, energy or vibration that I'm always drawn to try to explore that and to experiment how I can express that. I should maybe say it, or could say it in a very different way. It's not actually me so much being in control of the work. It's as if certain things want to express themselves, and they're not even things. And it's sort of my job to try and manifest this non-verbal energy that surrounds me, that I'm immersed in. This is another take. You can see it's got a very different flavor and a very different dynamic. So it's kind of, nothing is static. Everything is coming together. Everything is almost falling apart. And that's one of the dance elements that happens in the work as well. Other times I go into more forested areas, which is a very different environment, a very different feel. And then other works occur. Here you can see another mountain in the background and a number of trees in the foreground. Some of you might be interested in the sort of materials. And as I mentioned before, I use quite a lot of the watercolor pencils and water, and I disturb the material quite a lot with either brushes, or I wet the paper beforehand before I put something on. And in other works, not so much in this one, there is a lot of ink work as well, where I also use the wetness of the paper that I've wetted before or disturbing it afterwards. So there is a lot of fluidity in the actual appearance, in the gradual coming together of the painting. This is another painting from within a forest where I can see through these monumental pine trees into the far distance. So it's not a hemmed in feeling of a forest, but this grandiose feeling. And I really felt very, very drawn to this character here, which was just so glowing and luminous. And I really felt I want to bring that out. You can see here also materials wise, I just want to mention that that I use also graphite and some gouache here on top of some of the sections. And I also use quite a lot of collage, where I just tear down a piece of paper that I take with me anyway, and then I stick that on top of a section of the painting. And sometimes I overpaint that again. Sometimes I just leave it blank like that. And this is sort of this continuous play between sort of a painting getting so over intense that it almost fuses my brain, and then I need to sort of, you know, give it a bit of breathing space and settle it a little bit again. And then those kinds of interventions help with that. With the gouache, it's quite nice because I can, if I brush it down a bit or with a spatula, thin it out, one has the sort of traces come through from what happened before. So that's also a very helpful addition in my toolkit. This now is another setup, and I've shown you quite a lot of paintings so far, which quite clearly deal with the topography or the motion of the landscape, the expansiveness of the landscape, the materiality of the landscape. But I also do work which is much more reaching into what we would normally maybe call mythology, myth. And in this instance, I was very drawn to a beech tree that just has this incredible force right down into rock. And the weather was quite wet. So the whole thing was like the land of the Fae, with all the moss and everything. And so I just started painting. And as I mentioned before, I don't really have a plan, and I let happen what wants to come. And here you can see two paintings. I will show them to you in a moment, so you can see them properly. You can also see here my ink bottles and my pen. I work with nib and holder. And here I'm drying them underneath my tarpaulin, just so that, you know, I can then roll them up when they're sort of hopefully semi-dry. And from a bit further afield, this would be the setup. Later the sun came out, so it's a slightly more friendly looking picture. But I hope you get from that sense, it's quite the opposite of what we've seen before, this sort of expansiveness and vastness. And now it begins to be this very, very intense, close to. Yet, of course, you've got these majestic trees that just, you know, have age and everything, the history with them. And one of the pictures that came about was this one. So that's when people say to me, so you work outdoors, so what does it look like? And it's always a bit hard to explain that this is possibly what it could look like. And I've done a lot of work with Stone Age artifacts and caves and Stone Age people, and I have a shamanic practice also, as some of you are well aware. And so in this instance, what wanted to show itself was not the energies of a rock formation or the sky being over a vast landscape, but it was actually a woman in a cave with her guardian animals. And I have no explanation any further than that, but that's what wanted to show itself. And equally, a mammoth came. I've had a mammoth come quite a bit in my work, and welcome is what I find. Slightly different here. This is a different spot. Again, we're still all in the Alps, in this big area that I keep coming back to. And this is a bit of a ledge inside a forested area. And I knew when I first came and wanted to set up that some animals, deer or something, must be there, because I could see their excrement. It's one of the things I find, that it's quite difficult to find a spot where you can set yourself up in the Alps, because it's so precipitous. And if you find something that's akin to a ledge or something, usually you have other creatures who go there, and they seem to like it very much, to enjoy the view and the energy that I also appreciate while they digest whatever they've just munched someplace. And then while I was there, actually, I could see that it wasn't deer, but it was chamois. And they then, I could see them, and they rested, you know, I don't know, 50 yards from me, all the while I was painting. And unsurprisingly, in the work, you could also say it's maybe another animal from the mountains. It doesn't matter, you know, I'm not trying to represent. It wasn't trying to say, okay, wow, I've seen a chamois, it needs to get into the painting. It was like, I'm painting, I'm starting, what's happening here? And suddenly the chamois comes about. I'll show you a few more pictures without the setting. And just to give you a flavor again of the variety of works that come about. And many of them have, like in this instance, something that's very much a storytelling thing. I don't know the story. It is my hope that other people see their own stories into them. And I have had the opportunity to talk to people about the work, and it is always super fascinating for me to hear what happens for them. And often, you know, it's like this, people have found quite scary because they saw this as a wolf and they felt, wow, you know, that's intense. And that's fine. That's interesting. Sometimes there are stories that I am aware of. This is my take on Diana and Action. So it's very different to the way that it's normally represented. And I guess one of the strands of my investigation generally is like, what is it like to be a woman in a world where most art and art theory and paintings are made by men, and mostly also for men, and where there has been a certain take on what woman is and so on. And that's kind of come up quite a lot in my work, and this kind of question, so what am I as a woman and what's okay for a woman? And another piece in that context is this one, where I don't know why, but I did pick up the whole witch hunt situation, which I think is incredibly powerful for women today still. And I talked to some about it, and they share with me that they also feel that it's still having a very powerful effect on us. And so this rather, to me, disturbing piece occurred. But, you know, that's what happens. And that's kind of how the work comes about. And there's no specific message around it other than whatever it is that you would see or bring to this. In one of the areas also, I've done some healing work with the land, because the land itself was incredibly disturbed. And after some rituals and things like that, which, you know, extend over a few days, and quite a lot of paintings I did, this one came up. It was a great relief, because these are, for me, the three Nornia, and they seem to be kind of quite happily floating through this space now. So for me, it's like a very positive development and conclusion. And also in the same area, I found that there were these three women who were looking slightly bemused at the man in the feathers, wondering what he was about and what he does. And they were friendly and just pensive about this presence that they found themselves with. And then finally, the last one from the Alps, it's exactly the same area that the last two were. And this is the goddess that finds herself in her sacred area with the rock face behind. So that was another painting that just came into being. And it was the last one in one of my painting immersions there. So after quite a lot of work with that land, suddenly this was like a big closure moment towards the end. I'm now moving to a different landscape, and some of you might be much more familiar with this kind of thing. This is in Devon, and I had a wonderful time being on this amazing cliff area. And you can see here one of the paintings, and you can also see how I was working. Unlike the others paintings in the Alps that you've seen, it's the same paper, and I'll give you the size. It's 59.4 centimeters by 42, so about 60 by 42, which is, I think, A2 roughly. And in the Alps, I work on it without a support, because I kind of dragging a support around as well, you know, up the hills, down the hills, is kind of a bit intense, but also it's not really necessary. But I did think at the sea with the wind, it's going to be really difficult to work. So I made myself a board, a lightweight board, and I drilled through here through the board and put some string through. And I took some clamps with me, really serious, you know, they're sort of like clamps for carpentry, to put the paper, really properly fix it in all four corners. And then I could tie that to the tree, to these bushes as well, with other clamps, and just tie it around. You can see a tie is here, for instance, to just really, really make sure that the whole thing doesn't just blow away. And that was a pretty good idea. It was very warm, but it was also at times very exposed. And here is another one. You can again see different materials here. These are some crayons that I also use sometimes. And here is me painting along, and not always with a tarp. Obviously, if there's absolutely no wet underneath, there's no necessity, especially as the paper has its own protection here. There you can also see I use some very thin pointed Stabilo felted pens at times. So that's another material. And this, I just show you now a range of the works that happened. A lot had to do with the drama of this landscape, and a lot had to do with the sea itself and this primordial beginning of all life. That was something, again, that was given to me as I was working and wondering what would I, what will happen. But this, for instance, you can, well, the way I see it is as if there's mammoth hidden here. You can sort of see the teeth and the body, and it's sort of coming to life from this, whatever it is that maybe breathes the life into it, or one doesn't quite know. I also did one which was more descriptive of the landscape, the coast, the sea, the sky, the movement, the motion, the way that this topography is actually quite lyrical. So that was a different take. And here again, it's very, very much the sea and the sea floor and the horizon, and then the sky. And it's almost like this electricity. It's almost like lightning without you necessarily seeing it with your bare eyes, because I just feel it in my body. And the whole Stone Age shamanic witches thing also came very powerfully, because it felt to me as if these spirits inhabit this dramatic landscape and have maybe inhabited it forever. And so this to me is a cauldron and the moon, and then some creature doing some ritual, we don't quite know what, but it looks like a lot of fun. And here again, we have a relationship between a singular figure, if you like, and either the moon or the sun. And it's very much, to me, on this sort of cliff that's then breaking off. So it's got that held in. And you can see here as well the collage that I mentioned before. So again, I use that, and I use it very obviously. I'm not trying to disguise it. It's not about, oh, something went wrong. It's just another way of finally arriving at the picture that wants to be arrived at. And that's another take, which is almost, you might have seen in one of the earlier photographs that there were these sort of rock formations in the sea that have been, washed away, eroded over centuries, and they fascinated me. And here is one of them, and it's almost as if it's kind of beginning to lift itself out of the rest of the underwater, or the rocks that are under the water, and as if it's looking out, maybe it's waking up. Maybe, we don't know, but it's certainly for me got that kind of motion, and as if it's, or he or she is looking out into the distance. And then I also did some work really on this sort of incredible water. I mean, if you think about it, you see the sea, it's so expansive and it's so very, very deep, and there's so much going on, there's so much life. And that was something that really, really struck me. So for me, this is like the sea floor. And then this doesn't try to describe any particular animals or vegetation. There's some algae type vegetation in the sea. That wasn't my interest. It was more that sort of power that lifts itself in there. And that's, the source in a way of all life. And this intensity was something that just grabbed hold of me. Similar interest, but a very different take on it in this one. So that's something that happens also, that sort of topic gradually clarifies itself, and then I approach it in different ways, see what happens, see what comes about. This one is, you did see it earlier in one of the photos where I just showed you my in situ, and it is a reference to one of those rock formations in the sea. And again, here are the three women sitting there pondering this. and we're not quite sure, are they worshipping, are they relating, are they just together in some ritual? But there's a strong connection between them being sort of in dialogue, in conversation on some level with this character on this ledge where I was also positioned for my painting work. I have a very strong connection with some birds, and raven is one of them. And at this cliff edge, it was the most extraordinary sight to see a couple of raven come ever so often, and then they would come to the edge where the cliff actually hits pretty much the water, and then they totally nosedive, like an absolute military plane, and they would go down, and there was, I don't think, any reason other than them just enjoying the same thing that I was enjoying. And so at some point, one of them made his appearance known in the painting. And then that's another one that kind of amuses me, because I have this whatever insect this is, and then some kind of sort of, is it a shaman, some sort of person in the background, and there's some relationship, but I don't know what the relationship is, and that's very good for me, because it kind of leaves me open to keep speculating instead of knowing. I mean, my work is never about a message. It's never about saying, okay, this is what it's about, that's what you're going to take away from it. And then the last one in this series from Devon that I want to show you is this one. And it was, I think, the very last painting I did. And to me, this is like the battery of life. I don't know how this came about, but this incredibly luminous singing, I don't want to call it object, but part of the work, with this connection down into the ground, and then within all the water, and one doesn't quite know, is the water actually vertically upright? Is it a slice through the water, or are we looking down across? And precisely that multidimensionality is, to me, so fascinating. And here also just this interference in the sky, like the electric currents, and this very peculiar stopping here with nothing on this side. So there's an incredibly charged sense that I get from this in a good way. And I think it is for me like a battery that I can look at, and it just recharges me. So this is the works on paper. They're all on the same size that I've mentioned. And now I'm going to move you to Epping Forest. And this is the oil painting situation there. And obviously, you can sort of see my paints that I have, and here's my palette, and I've laid it all out, and the rucksack, and all that kind of stuff. I work and have worked for quite some time now in a format which is, let me tell you, about 61.2 centimeters by 40.6, and it's actually a diptych. So it's two panels together, and I'll show you some in a moment so you get more what I'm saying. But I just want to show you a bit more to begin with how the setup is there. And this is a view onto, when I've been painting, and when, the painting, you can see here is a cut through the painting. That's because it is in two panels, and that's one side and that's the other. And I do put them down like that, and I do paint the way across them as well. So that's kind of important, that's how they're created. And that's now one of them. And it shows you relatively a bit more clearly maybe than some of the works on paper, that these are trees and they're bushes and there's sky. At the same time, there's still that kind of rhythm and energy of place that I'm trying to capture. So I'm not interested in just representing the outer appearance of these, but also, like in this case, almost the communication, the dance that can happen between trees. It depends on what some people might say, the spirits of the trees. That's to me all pretty much the same. And here another setting where it's just got this beautiful opening here and a lot more undergrowth here. And then this beautiful branch that just has this incredibly graceful motion over, and that really attracted me very much. And I'm always keen to keep everything very fresh looking. That's another thing I might want to mention at this point. I work all these works in one go. So I don't take the work back out again. I take it out and I finish it in that one session for the paperworks as well as the oil paintings. And this is now one of the oil paintings where it's less obvious, like we've seen some that really do declare, yeah, this is trees. But with this one, it's not so obvious. And yet you can see that it's almost two, again, is it the two spirits? Is it two trees? Is it two bushes? But they seem to be dancing, and I can almost hear their step. I can almost be with them, really, and they feel very dense to me as well, which is interesting. So they're not just lofty, transparent spirits. And then this one is a close-up onto a massive tree trunk of a beech tree. And I was fascinated by the curvature, how all these curves come together and they create all these wonderful rhythms, really. And so that was my engagement, let's say, with this landscape in its own right. And then finally, this is a similar take also on a close-up of a tree and how it just has this life force within it, that kind of, you know, you can sort of, I can feel how the sap is rising and how almost how it's growing. So even though it's a tree trunk, and oftentimes one can think, well, that's a, you know, very static thing, that's the one stable thing in a tree. I don't actually experience it as that. Yes, and that's all the pictures I wanted to show you tonight. So I'll stop the share and hand over to Alex.
Thank you so much, Bettina. As ever, I'm so struck by the magnitude. So that at one point there is the absolute observation and the felt observation. So you're feeling and you're observing through every sense, and you're really articulate about that communication between the trees, that communication between the environment and how you're receiving that. And then also all of those lovely practical details of pinning the paper down and holding things so that they're not blown away. So thank you so much. I'm going to open up for questions in a moment, but I just wanted to offer up as well, you know, I've been spending time with Bettina's work, and the more time you spend with it, the more that it gives you back. And there is this real sense of the duration of her making time, but also this sense that it is, I think, Bettina, you were using words like primordial beginning and force, energy, energetic, felt, fluidity, and these kind of huge, there's the sense of the magnitude of what you're doing, and that is over an expanse of time that is bigger than that moment of you responding. So I just wanted to put that out as something that just really kind of resonated for me today. Over to what I would really like us to do, because we're on Zoom, we're going to have about a 20-25 minute conversation and response to the work. What I would like you to do is if you've got something that you want to say, just so that I can cue you in so that it's not completely chaotic, if you can let me know, or if you're feeling a little bit shy as well, then do feel free to pop a question or an observation into the chat and I can pick up on that as well. So does anybody have anything that who wants to kick us off? Yes, Steve. Do you want to unmute yourself?
Yeah, I've just done it. I'd just like to know, it's great seeing you again in Zoom, Bettina, rather than in a field. Yeah, how quickly do you work?
Really quickly.
Yeah, that's the impression I got. Yeah. I
mean, like I paint a picture definitely in the one day, but when I work on paper, I might do, sometimes I only do 1 or 2, but sometimes I do 3 or 4. And it's very much of the moment, you know, it's about what's going on out there and what's going on with me and what's going on now. And it's not something about refining and going back and this kind of thing. It's about capturing that essence. And if I go back to the same spot, sometimes I'm called to the same spot and I do work there again, something completely different will happen. And equally, I couldn't repeat any of the works that I've created. I don't know how they came about. So it's, I often think a bit of the sort of Chinese and Japanese, you know, brush and ink work, and it's that kind of thing. It's got to happen, and then that's it.
Great, thank you. I thought that was the case.
Denise.
Just a question. I was wondering, so we see what you've produced. That it's been really marvelous. At what point would you say a work begins? Does it sort of begin when you're at home and you're beginning to pack and think about what you're taking? Does it begin when you're walking tours? Is it part, you know, setting things up very in the way you do? Where would you say it begins?
I think that's a really interesting question, and I think everything you said is part of it. You know, I even now that I know some landscapes that I've been going back to, I think about them here, and I don't want to say meditate. It's kind of got certain connotations, but I mean this is all with me all the time, and so I mean, I haven't wanted to go back to Germany this year because of all the restrictions and all that stuff. But, you know, I've been there so much this year, despite the fact that I physically haven't been there. And the same with this coast in Devon and so on. And with Epping Forest, you know, I have areas, and what I haven't talked about and will talk about a bit more in the third talk is that I don't only go there and then I paint, but I've mentioned some animal encounters, but you know, I've mentioned that I did some healing work with land. So I also do ceremony out there sometimes. And all of that is connected with the painting. I'm not even just painting there. I'm just living there, and painting is part of that form of living. So when does the painting start? I can't separate it in a way. The way that might be interesting, the way that a painting then comes into being is very much, say that I'm in the painting immersion. So I'm somewhere and I think, where shall I even go? And I often don't have a plan, even if I know the area and I have a sense, this is maybe where I'm called, or I have a sense, I don't want to go to any of the places I've been to. So then I need to explore and I go off the beaten track. I often follow, you know, the tracks that animals have left behind. And sort of see where does that take me, and it's really more it's very difficult in our language. I think the fact that we always have this sort of subject object, and it's always trying to find this match in between I was called or I go out, and it's not really like that. It occurs, but if I say that it sounds a bit stupid, but that's more how it is. It's a continuous dialogue of these sort of very faint little sounds, and then, you know, then suddenly I think, okay, this is the spot where I'm going to work today. Okay, then I start, and I might have a sense, okay, the beautiful sky or the expansiveness, but I also might not, and it might just begin. Some paintings I've had intentions as well, so I needed help. So I had some whatever challenge, and I do medicine paintings as well, where I literally say, okay, I need medicine now. This is the question, like, what's going to come? And strangely enough, that has often really created very, very powerful work, which, you know, when other people see it, they notice what's going on as well. So that's also, where is it beginning? It's slightly different outlooks that make the painting, invite the painting in. And then sometimes also, while I'm in a painting immersion, a topic clarifies itself more. So for instance, on one of the immersions, I realized the encounter with animal is really problematic. How do I encounter animal? And suddenly for days and days and days, I worked with that kind of question in mind. And so again, specifically, each painting came from the fact that this kind of topic had come into being, had come to become more clear to me. So that's sort of different levels, different registers that I can maybe answer and not answer so much your question. But you can ask me back if I can clarify it any better, Denise, if you want to.
No, I was kind of hoping that it would just kind of be whatever.
Okay.
I didn't really have a preconception, and I actually assumed it wasn't. Now I'm going to set up and now I'm going to paint. So it's interesting to hear your, you're kind of working through the ideas. So no, appreciate that.
I think it's also more like painting is almost, you know, a necessity in a sense. It's just the way to do it. And then there are other ways of doing things. But so it's not so much that I think, oh God, I'm a painter, now I need to paint something. And how do I start this? As if it's this externalized project. That's not really how it works for me.
And that's what it looks like. It doesn't look like an abstract or an external event of some sort.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Louise looks like she may have. Yes, Louise, go for it.
Hello, Bettina. That was really, really fascinating. What I wanted to ask you is it important to you to be able to work without interruptions when you're working outside?
That's a good one. I mean, I try to go off the beaten track because I find human beings the most disruptive and annoying aspects. However, I've also sometimes had it that I've been interrupted or disrupted by them. And then, and I think, Steve, you will know what I'm going to say with the shamanic practice, you know, you also accept that even things that are really annoying, that they might actually be quite beneficial to your process. And strangely enough, some paintings, they take a different course as a result of this interruption. But I'm not trying to fight that and not to embrace it. You know, no, I'm not that kind of person. I do get annoyed, but then that kind of thing can find its way in some way into the work. And I can also assess, you know, why is it that I'm annoyed and what can I do about it? What is going back into some kind of form of balance? I think that's the issue for me, that it throws me a bit off my inner balance if I'm not careful. But I mean, there are other interruptions, you know, it might start to rain and you've just started something and you've got to think, gee, how do I cope with this now and so on. And or it gets really cold, or there are all sorts of, I mean, that's one of the great things about working outdoors, that for me, I do like, in a way, those little, it's just that lived time. I don't really want to be in this abstract room and pocket, you know, where everything is fixed. So I embrace the fluidity. But I do find, I mean, I do try to get away from people. And if I know, for instance, you know, it's a sunny Sunday, I will make sure I don't go where everybody else goes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I can understand that. Yeah, but otherwise, yes, embracing or sort of, yeah, kind of accepting what happens to a certain extent.
To a certain extent, and even with the inner not liking it thing, you know, you can still say, okay, and as I say, it's really quite often pushed my work into different direction where I've almost taken more of a stand than in the painting, because it's challenged me. So I had to decide, am I going to shrivel up or pack up, or am I going to say, no, I'm going to be here? And sometimes I sing to myself. I sing a lot to trees and things anyway, but I don't normally sing when I paint, and I don't listen to music anymore. I used to at times, but not for a long time, I haven't. But then I might, you know, sing to myself to get myself back into a rhythm. And that's kind of quite empowering as well.
Yes, getting yourself back on track. Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Louise.
Where next? Yes, Annette. think you're on mute. So
Yeah. Thank you, Bettina. That was very inspirational to hear how far you've taken everything in the way that you are approaching the whole of nature and the earth and landscape. So thank you very much for that. And I do kind of grasp what you're talking about and what the images present. But my question is considerably more practical. It's more on the practicalities of the logistics, because you say that you stay and paint for maybe 3 weeks in one location, and what you've shown us are little camps that you've created for your paintings, but do you yourself actually camp on site, or are you actually carrying all that kit from a vehicle and you're actually staying somewhere else and you just come back to the site every day? How does the practicalities of the logistics work?
So the practicalities are that I live nearby on the whole. I'm now just thinking, I mean, especially in the Alps, I don't live in these shelters that I've shown you. They are literally my studios. Yeah. And I do go back to wherever it is that I'm staying. I'm trying to stay outdoors on the land as best I can. I'm laughing because Steve and I had just been on a camping ground doing some stuff with some other people. So we've just lived that kind of part. And I have a good friend now where I can stay on her farm at times, and I can pitch my tent where she is, and she's got a shepherd's wagon that I can rent to stay in. I try to sleep under the stars as much as I can, so I try to avoid the tent if possible, because just not having anything above me is absolutely the best. It's just not always possible because obviously sometimes it's raining, and then so that's that part. I also, like, I've just been to Wales for a couple of weeks this summer, and I rented a yurt, but that was only for storage, really. I didn't use it. I again stayed in my tent, and you know, they have, I mean, I'm used now to compost loos and outdoor kitchens, and I really, really like that. And you know, I mean, if I could live outside all the time, I mean, I kind of would. And I eat, generally speaking, only organic food anyway, and I try to get stuff from the locality, so that I'm connected as best I can to the force field, if you like, or this environment, this this immediacy, this immediate connection, because that's, you know, I think, okay, I said I have a really strong Stone Age connection. I actually consider myself a Stone Age woman, and I should live in a cave, but that's not really for hire, so I can't. And so I'm trying to live in a way that's sort of closest to what's healthy for me, what's really right for me. Sometimes I can't find such a place. I've rented a garden house somebody had, and again I camped in there, you know, in the actual garden. But sometimes I rent a flat, and then I usually, logistics, I send parcels to myself. I have to send parcels there and back. And then I usually hire a car where I am, so that I can get from where I'm staying with all that gear. Also, because I sometimes need to buy painting materials where I am. So that's really important. And then I drive to some car park somewhere and have a big rucksack. I mean, it really is about 15 kilos, because, you know, I've shown you the materials, but I need also clothing, because when you are outside, the wind chill and so on is quite considerable. So it's not good enough to just have the normal layers. You need an extra insulation layer, gloves, hats. I need a lot of fluid, because obviously I'm sweating quite a lot when I go up these mountains, because it's quite a climb. Or if I'm on the coast in Devon, you know, it's kind of hot. Then I need food, and I'm not a hardy person, I hasten to add. So I'm not the one who kind of, okay, I'll go out and I'll live off thin air, and then in the evening I eat a bit of something and I'll be fine. I won't be fine. I want my provision while I'm out there. And so, you know, so that all has to be wrapped up and taken along. I always have a walking stick, as well, which is very helpful as well to pitch something if you need to make a quick shelter, but also just for steadying myself with all that weight, to be safe. So yeah, good general gear is important. But you can, again, if you have a specific further question, do ask Annette, or does that?
Yeah. No, I think that clarifies for me how you manage. Obviously, as I said, when I joined, I have painted outdoors in the south of France every year for 30 years and attempted to capture my experience of being in that landscape. And I've obviously had the experience of carting all the gear. And I just wondered, you know, where you based yourself, whether you really did take a tent and actually sleep on site for 3 weeks at a stretch in the middle of a wood or on the edge of a cliff or whatever. But what you're saying certainly makes sense, that you're basing yourself somewhere where you can kind of almost sort of, well, not get yourself back to civilization, but at least gather yourself and sort yourself out and then go back on site. And that makes sense when you've got all of this equipment and all the food. I mean, I've never had to carry all my food with me. I've had to carry watercolor paintings, and that's blooming heavy. But so you're obviously carrying an awful lot more stuff than I ever have done. And it's just interesting that you are actually, you know, using a base and going back to that base, because that makes perfect sense to me.
I mean, one of the most amazing things was in a different area in Germany, where it is the Stone Age area. I did actually manage to rent a little sort of a timber house, and then I could walk every day to work.
Right.
And just walking down a sort of pretty much empty valley through a forest, and then just go into this sort of valley where I was going to work and be there. So, but that's really unusual. Normally it's a bit further than that. And I do need to have a car in between to hop, you know, because like you say, back to civilization, I mean, I do need, you know, those kinds of creature comfort things.
Yeah, thank you.
Pleasure.
I am very conscious that we are nearing the end of our time. Do we have time for one last question? Just pushing that a little bit, because it's such a special evening. Does anyone have one final question that they are really keen to ask? Yes, I knew there was one, Sabrina.
Hi, thank you, Bettina, for sharing some of your work. It's been really good to see. I have several questions, so it's quite difficult for me to just choose, but I think maybe I'll choose the one that touches on slightly a different topic. So what I really like about your work is how it conveys opposite feelings. So at least for me, so overall, when I look at it, it's very peaceful and it just conveys a sense of calmness. But then when I start to focus in on the details, I see and feel different things. And so my question is, do you think this difference in sensations that is conveyed is coming from the types of materials that you're using, or your method, or from something else?
I think we would need to talk a bit more about how you're experiencing, really. And the question lays more in the beholder, I think. Mm-hmm. So I think it's very much your experience of my work, and I'm super interested to hear it. So thank you for letting me know, because it's not a way how I read my work. And I'd like to find out more, and maybe we will have an opportunity to for me to get that feedback, maybe with a view to one or two specific pictures or something. It might be, if I relate it to my own experience of my work, that there is a sort of, if one wants to call it, a juxtaposition between, on the one hand, a cohesiveness in the work, And at the same time, that one doesn't quite know how that comes about, because there isn't this sort of overall imagery or something that makes it clear why it hangs together. So it's like almost all these little noises, all these things that go on, and yet before you know it, they somehow gel into a cohesiveness. That's what my hope is, because this is how I believe life is. I don't think there is a thing where it's all clear and it's like this and I can explain it. It's about all these little things, and strangely enough, if they come into the right harmony, into the right balance, then something bigger than all these elements arises. And that's the magic.
Right. Well, that makes sense with what I can see, in particular in some images, and I think it links. Well, I guess this is me interpreting now, but it's kind of, I see it as you're kind of absorbing what's in you, but I could also see it as someone kind of putting things without really knowing what they're putting down, but then overall it just makes sense and connects everything and becomes harmonious, and then that leads to this feeling that I'm getting of this calmness and peacefulness, kind of like a sort of relief of what has been put on the paper. It's like I don't know how to explain it, but it's this sort of different feelings lead to a different feelings that you perhaps might be experiencing when you're creating the piece, then leads to a different overall feeling when you look at the piece as a whole.
I mean, you've expressed it really, really well, and that's great for me to hear that someone else, you know, because I do it and I don't know what it does for somebody else. So it's really wonderful to hear that somebody else gets this seeming duality of the sort of appearance, and we don't know, there's no master plan, and then in the end there is a sort of something that, like you say, is peaceful and is it's hopefully in that sense also a consolation. It's not running away from the you know, disparity of life and the many questions that we can't answer, but it has something there that's reassuring, and that is fantastic for me to hear that that's how it's perceived by you, by another human being. So thank you very much.
So I'm going to come in there. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for everybody, all of your questions.